What is your stance with spirituality now that you've come to this sort of second part of your life?
Spirituality gives us a higher force for living. As long as the focus of your life is on you and making money and establishing yourself, it's going to prove to be incomplete and insufficient when it comes to matters of the soul. It can't withstand suffering. We need something of greater substance. When a man is initiated into those promises, life is hard, you are not that important, you are not in control, and you are going to die. When a man is initiated into those promises, that's when I would suggest that they really become a man, where they understand that life is not about me. It's about being in service to others, living into and answering the question, what was I born to do?
Welcome to Unreasonable Autonomy. My name is Sarah Grace. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs and innovators who refuse to settle. Here we dive deep into raw, real conversations with boundary pushers who have pursued seemingly impossible ideas and yet have achieved unreasonable results, whether that's in their faith, relationships, health, politics, yes, even business. All of those conversations are happening right here, right now. So let's buckle up because this isn't about playing it safe. Unreasonable ideas, unstoppable results. Let's go. Thrilled to welcome to the studio Jake Kauffman. Jake Kauffman is an international high performance coach and transformational advisor to purpose-driven, visionary men who are seeking to grow in their life and leadership. He has supported hundreds of founders and CEOs to thrive, elevate their performance, and reach the next level in all areas of life, business, and relationship. His mission is to help men radically grow and transform so that they can achieve their full potential. Excited to introduce you to the incredible Jake Kauffman. Oh, my dear friends, so excited to welcome you back to the Unreasonable Autonomy podcast. I have got a brand new friend on the podcast today, the amazing Jake Kauffman. I am so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you again for having me. I'm excited to be here and been looking forward to the conversation.
It's going to be good. And I'm a little bit intrigued because my world is all centered around female buying psychology and what makes women tick, what makes women buy, how do we get brands in front of women that they're obsessed with and they refer. And your world could not be more different than mine, right? But is like equally necessary to understand. And that is that you have dove into the world of how to help men become their absolute best selves. And as I sort of like, we've never met in person, right? We're sharing this podcast studio today. I dove in to prepare for this interview. I dove into your social networks. I dove into your business. I did some undercover work, which I think every podcast host should do to show up prepared. And I kept seeing this one theme throughout pretty much everything that you publish. And what I'm going to do is just say the word, and I want you to tell me a little bit about why that word matters in your life. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, go ahead.
The word is adventure.
Okay.
Does that resonate with you? Why would I come up with that word when I come across your world and your feed?
Well, it does resonate with me. Absolutely. A lot of what I do is basically centered around adventure for a very specific reason, because the masculine expands into challenge. So what better thing to challenge you than adventure, right? Because risk is an inherent part of going on an adventure. You don't actually know what's going to happen. You're stepping into the unfamiliar, the unpredictable. And so I've been hosting men's retreats where we take men deep out into nature for the better part of a decade now. So adventure is inherently interwoven into the experience specifically to challenge men and to invite them into a new perspective.
Oh, I have a million questions based upon what you said, but I also don't want to do a disservice to those listening who may not have come across your work yet. And hopefully this will be an avenue for my listeners to dive in, and you must know Jake Kauffman, right? There's a reason he is here, and that I said, yes, he's got to be here on the podcast. So please look at the links below, find a way to connect with him and be part of his world. Whether you are male or female, there is something of intense value for you there. So for those listeners who have not engaged with your world, what got you into this obsession of being my best self? And yes, bringing in a lot of adventure, but more so diving into the world of helping men challenge themselves and become their best selves.
Well, a little bit of my story.
Yeah.
In my mid-20s, I started to go to therapy, to counseling, and it was in and through that experience. This is what my entire book is more or less focused upon, was what I went through specifically around my self-growth journey and how that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I'm a firm believer that all growth as a man begins with the question, what have you been doing with your pain? And until we answer that question, we're just dancing around the issue. And so for me, that was acknowledging and admitting that I had been sexually abused growing up. And the moment I was able to name that, then I was actually able to go about healing it in a way that put me in control of the adaptive traits, the compensating strategies, and the limiting beliefs that stemmed from that experience specifically. Because as you can imagine, when that took place, I made up stories about myself, other people, and the world. It negatively impacted my self-esteem, my worthiness, and then I just carried that around with me throughout the course of my life. And I didn't realize how much it not only had impacted me, but served as the basis for what I attracted into my life and what results I consistently created in romantic relationship, in finances, business, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I started to go down the path of self-development, I realized that much of my personality, and this is true for all of us, by the way, you don't have to have experienced something acutely traumatic like abuse or assault for this to be true for you, because we all make up stories when we're really young kids about ourselves, other people in the world, that form limiting biases that prevent us from being our best self and accomplishing what we're capable of. And so the moment I started to really dive into that, it created a ripple effect throughout my entire life. I started to attract more opportunity, better relationships, both romantic and in terms of friendship. My business started to take off. I was in the healthcare technology space initially in my late 20s, early 30s. Was a co-founder there. The company exploded. It now has over 400 employees. And eventually I was prompted to start my coaching and consulting practice, which I've been doing for the better part of 10 years now. So of course I was like, oh, I have tapped into like this secret, if you will, of what I need to do in order to live the life that I want to live, but also to live up to and answer the question, what was I born to do? Right? Because that's really what life is all about, if you ask me, right?
Yeah.
And so that really changed the trajectory of my entire life. And of course, has now become the basis for the work that I do and the work that I do with men.
It's really incredible. And I'm so sorry for your past experiences with sexual abuse. And I imagine that there are many here thinking that immediately they hear that and they distance themselves and say, oh, I haven't been through that. And so he has so much more that he can grow from and conquer, and he has a much more engaging story. What do you do to help the men that you work with not like place a hierarchy as far as trauma or experience and still own the fact that they have some form of pain? What's your practice like?
Sure. Well, trauma is much more about what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us, as opposed to what actually happened. So the moment you understand that, the moment we can remove any sort of stigma attached to comparison that causes someone to say, I can't relate to that. I haven't been through that. I didn't experience that. Or maybe I even experienced a lot worse, because I'm very aware that a lot of people have been through significantly more traumatic things than I have. Mine was an acute experience. It only happened once. Others have experienced a lot of chronic trauma repeated over time. But the moment you understand that it's much more about how it affects our self-image, our self-esteem, our self-worth, then you can go about the work of actually determining how is that showing up in my life, even if the event or the experience that happened seems relatively insignificant.
And in your experience and your expertise, when, anyone listening, I love that we're like 5 minutes into this and this is how deep we are. Like, let's go. This is so good. In your experience with your expertise, does the repetitiveness of trauma make it more complicated to unravel, heal, and produce something beautiful from, compared to one-time traumatic events?
It certainly serves to reinforce the story that you've made up, right? It achieves confirmation bias, absolutely. And so there is this additional traumatic effect when you continue to experience the same thing repeatedly. And at the same time, because the majority of our belief system is developed between the age of like 2 to 7, that's when over 70% of our psychological development occurs. Much of what we experience after 10 is really just confirmation bias to previous stories that we made up prior to that. So even if a traumatic experience continues to occur, right, we will continue to bring about and carry around this worldview, right, this pre-existing worldview, and apply it to new and different situations. It becomes the lens by which, right, we see ourselves, other people, and the world, and interact and engage with ourselves, other people, and the world. So the traumatic experience doesn't need to continue, right? Our beliefs, which by virtue is your truth, until you go about discovering, right? And this is the power of self-awareness. This is where change ultimately starts. Until you go about becoming aware, the beliefs that you continue to carry around, they're actually in control of you, not the other way around. So that's the power of self-awareness and self-growth, is that the moment you bring your unconscious beliefs to the conscious level, now you're in control.
Oh, I love this. I love this. I feel like I've heard this echoed with Ben Hardy. If you're a fan of his work, where he talks about how the past is not set, right? That you can rewrite meaning
Absolutely.
about the past. And I would imagine that there is some resistance to that idea, because some people hold on to trauma or hold on to those experiences. So I want to dive a little bit deeper and say, when you talk about this word of self-awareness, meaning you can pinpoint an event, or there's an awareness there.
Sure.
What tools can we use to actually see those stories, negative in nature, being played out in our lives? You mentioned in romantic relationships, in financial relationships. What guide me through how you help people become self-aware of how that trauma is playing out in their lives?
I think one of the easiest ways is to simply look at the patterns that you continue to repeat. In many ways, the pattern reveals the problem. And so when you take a look at the results that you continue to create time and time again, your results paint a picture and they tell a story. So when you begin to take an honest look at, okay, what do my results say that I believe about myself, believe about success, believe about money, believe about love, and am I experiencing the results that I deeply desire as it pertains to those particular things? That's when you can begin to pinpoint the limiting beliefs that you have pertaining to those things. And only then can you go about changing them. But that requires courage, right? Because the ego would always rather be right about what doesn't serve us than wrong about what does.
Quote of the day. That's the quote of the day right there. So, can you give us some really solid examples of clients or even yourself of how people have written their relationships with money or love or other relationships that we need to like open our eyes and look for?
So I'm of the belief that we all have a core belief that holds us back and ultimately prevents us from being the best version of ourselves. And until we identify what that belief is and the core fear attached to that belief, we're just going to continue to be caught up in this cycle where we're bringing pain from the past and recycling it in the present. So one of my best examples is, I work with a lot of CEOs, a lot of entrepreneurs and executives in order to help them optimize their belief system and their identity so that they can be more successful. One of the clients that I worked with years ago, she had a core belief that she was unaware of at the time, but that we eventually, through coaching, brought awareness to around how she couldn't trust other people because her core fear was of being betrayed. So how is this playing out in her business? She was continuing to hire people who served as confirmation bias to that belief. So we start talking about one of her employees who is not fulfilling their duties, right? Not following through on their responsibilities, right? And I'm like, she's complaining to them or complaining to me about this employee. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. When did you first feel that they weren't a good fit for this position? They didn't have the needed experience, expertise, etc. She's like, 2 weeks before I hired them.
Oh, wow.
And yet she ignored that intuitive knowing, hired them anyway, because she was moving too quickly in an effort to get to the next level and create the result that she was desiring. And how many people listening to this can relate to that, right? Just an excess of eagerness that ended up, biting her in the butt. So she hires this person, and then several months later, all of a sudden, she's having issues with this person, not delivering, not fulfilling their duties and their responsibilities. And she's coming to me for coaching around it. And I'm like, oh, well, this person is simply serving as confirmation bias to this pre-existing belief that you had. This is just your ego's attempt to keep the story about how you can't trust other people alive.
Wow.
So until we break through and overcome that belief, you are going to continue to find yourself in this position where you're hiring employees like this person, or you are hiring this also showed up in vendors that she would hire. She wouldn't hire the appropriate vendors that were needed to fulfill what she was looking for. And then, of course, she's like, you're not fulfilling on what you promised. And it's like, no, you just hired the wrong person for the job.
Wow.
And so the moment she was at a glass ceiling, she was doing about $50,000 to $60,000 a month. And sorry if you can hear my puppy in the background.
You're welcome.
Rocky. So she was at a glass ceiling, making about $50,000 to $60,000 a month. And she couldn't seem to move beyond that. And if you're familiar with The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, he talks in length about what he refers to as an upper limit. And an upper limit is simply this internal psychological barrier that we experience as it pertains to the felt worthiness that we have around what we feel worthy of receiving and experiencing.
Wow. This is incredible. And I particularly love that your example was a woman. And I know that you do work with a lot of male CEOs as well. Have you noticed that there are particular core beliefs that men tend to hang on to more so than women?
Not necessarily. I've never drawn that correlation. The core beliefs that most people hang on to are, centered around, I can't trust other people. My needs don't matter. I'm not good enough as I am.
Yeah.
Right. It's not okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to assert myself. Dude, everything is going wrong right now.
It's because this conversation is meant to be. You need a minute? You're good.
One second. Sorry.
Yeah, go.
Of course. It's been nothing but quiet and tranquil around the house all day. And then, of course, this happens. Okay. Where should we go back to? You asked a question about common recurring beliefs between men and women. Okay. Not necessarily. I've never noticed a consistent difference or correlation between like the beliefs that commonly show up for women as opposed to the beliefs that commonly show up for men. As you can imagine, I work primarily with entrepreneurs and executives. So the beliefs that most of them share revolve around, I can't trust other people. It's not okay to assert myself, or it's not okay to make mistakes. My needs don't matter, or I'm not good enough as I am, or it's not okay to fail, which drives a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. It's fascinating to think about that. It's more just, these are human core beliefs rather than, this, because I was a boy, I was raised this way, or I was a girl, I was raised this way. And one of the things that I know that my listeners are aching to hear, so I'm just going to ask it because we go real blunt on this show. And that is, what if, I would imagine that the women in the lives of these CEOs that you work with have an immense influence on their belief system, their success, their happiness, all of those things, right? And so I know that many of these women would be saying, gosh, the whole road of self-help or therapy or something, it tends to be more feminine in nature, right? Men are supposed to go out there and provide and produce and all this kind of stuff. There has been kind of a resurgence of, men need to work on themselves and become aware of their past and all of those things. How have you been able to build a business around something that can often be a tough sell?
Great question. I think it's really establishing the notion that without consistent personal development, you are now all that you will ever become.
Oh, that's so good.
So if you are committed to consistent improvement in terms of the opportunity that you attract in your life, what you achieve, all of that stems from your internal self-image and your current level of personal development. Again, going back to the reference around Gay Hendricks and the big leap, right? He talks about the upper limit that we all have, this psychological barrier that resides unconsciously within us that determines what we feel worthy of receiving: love, opportunity, money, financial abundance, etc. Well, what determines the limit of that psychological barrier? It's our current level of personal development, emotional intelligence, self-growth, and healing. So if we want to elevate beyond that, we have to invest further in those very things. Otherwise, if our results come to exceed that threshold, what are we going to do? We're going to self-sabotage in order to return to what is normal and familiar. Right? So the work of self-development, if you are committed to not just success, but sustainable success over time, it's really a prerequisite.
And let me ask a follow-up question to that. What attempts or roads do you find many of your very best clients took in order to solve the core belief before they came to you?
Doing more and trying harder.
Just more hours, logging the hours, rep.
Right. But the thing about that is you can't optimize for a behavior at the level of behavior, because our behaviors are driven by what? They're driven by beliefs. So in order to optimize for your behavior, you have to first optimize for and elevate your belief system and your identity. Right? This is why, this is a perfect time of year to talk about this, because I think it's either February 1st or March 1st, where the majority of people are not on track to accomplish either their New Year's resolutions or the goals that they set out to achieve this year. Why is that? What is the ultimate reason for that? It's because they're just trying harder, exerting more effort, right? Shifting their behavior, but that doesn't work long term because their belief system is the same. This is why over 90% of people who hire a coach, whether it's a fitness trainer, dietitian, nutritionist, life coach, whatever, revert back to their former level of behavior once the coaching is removed, right? Those are really terrible statistics. But what does that illustrate? It illustrates that most of the work of self-development and, quite frankly, coaching, right, is incomplete and insufficient in its approach because it's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic by supporting people in changing their behavior as opposed to optimizing for what's driving their behavior in the first place.
Okay, I'm going to push you on this. Let's go. So I believe very firmly that our fulfillment, and I'm talking specifically about digital marketers, coaches, consultants, right? That we need to be held to a higher standard on fulfillment, right? On how we actually fulfill on the services that we offer. And I had an interview with the amazing Ashley Latimer about a month ago, and she was talking about how the standard rate of success in a typical coaching program, I'm slaughtering the data, but I got the number right, is a 3% success.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah.
Right? 3%. And so immediately in my brain, as like a nurturer and as a mother of 4 kids, I'm like, 3% is not okay with me, right? So how do you, especially, I think it is so hard for coaches, right? Mm-hmm. How do you keep yourself into a space of, I am fulfilling what I promised I would fulfill. I truly care about my people. And at what point does it lay into a, you can only lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink type scenario?
Well, in order to succeed in any coaching container, you have to fundamentally have 2 things, which is you have to be committed and you have to be coachable, right? Because you're onto something, right? I can't want it more than my client.
Right.
So let's just get that out of the way for a moment. I can never want it more than them. But as long as you're committed and as long as you're coachable, it ultimately ends up coming down to proper expectations, right? How long is this going to take to achieve your desired result? Right? And I know the work of self-development can be somewhat esoteric, but allow me to, use an example that I think can illustrate really well what I'm talking about. If you are overweight and out of shape and you go to the gym and you hire a personal trainer, they're going to be, and you clearly articulate your goals for both weight loss and muscle gain, depending on your current physical condition. If you were to ask them, hey, be honest with me, how long do you think it's going to take for me to get here? They have a fiduciary responsibility, in my opinion, to be as honest as they possibly can about how long they think it's going to take, while also taking into consideration that setbacks are very normal. So for me to quote unquote promise, right, that if you do this, and this, you are automatically going to achieve X result, I'm never going to promise that because I can't predict whether or not that person is going to execute on the homework and the action items that I give them. I can't predict whether or not they're going to self-sabotage. Do they actually show up to their coaching calls? When they're on the coaching calls, are they bringing their all? So proper expectations are key. Proper context from me as a coach is also key, because when it comes to achieving any result, I don't care what result it is, it comes down to 3 things, and that's intensity, frequency, and duration. Going back to the fitness example that I just gave, when it comes to losing weight, getting in shape, it really comes down to, okay, frequency. How frequently are you going to the gym? When you go, right, duration, how long are you there for? And number 3, how intense is the workout, right? Are you elevating your heart rate to the point, right, to where your nervous system is taxed, you're burning more calories, right? Or is your heart rate not really getting up there? Because that's going to affect things. Even then, taking all of that into consideration, I think we can all agree that getting in shape or losing weight is much more nuanced than that. Diet and nutrition plays a huge role in all of this. Sleep, recovery, hydration, supplementation all play an incredible role in all of this. Stress. So even if we nail intensity, frequency, and duration when it comes to you going to the gym, there are all these other factors that we have to take into consideration that are going to play a very big role in determining, right, your success or your ability to be successful, but also when you actually achieve your desired result. So anyone that says, like, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to get X result, they're lying to you. They are, and so, like, proper context, proper expectations are massively important when it comes to coaching someone and setting them up to win. Otherwise, I'm doing them a disservice. I'm very quick to tell prospective clients who come to me, like, if you're not willing to put 6 months into this, like, honestly, you probably shouldn't even bother. Because at the end of 3 months, we're really still scratching the surface in many respects, because becoming aware of all of the various aspects of your personality and the experiences that have gone into creating those aspects of your personality takes an incredible amount of time, right? As we grow and evolve, our ability to face what has happened to us simultaneously grows and evolves. And the reason I say that is because I imagine you've done a substantial amount of work on yourself. It's kind of the price you pay when it comes to being an entrepreneur.
Sure.
Right? Entrepreneurship is just one big self-development game. It really is. But that's why we often have to look at or unpack the same experience multiple times. And I often get clients saying to me, and you may have experienced this yourself, I thought I was past this already.
Yes. Shame.
No, right. But I'm very quick to let my clients know, no. This is normal. Because as we grow and evolve, our ability to face what has happened to us simultaneously grows and evolves. And so it can often feel like we're experiencing it for the first time or addressing it for the first time. When I first acknowledged that I was sexually abused growing up, I had a tremendously difficult time just communicating that to my therapist. Years later, and when I mean years, I mean like 10 years later, only then was I in a position within myself, based on all of the personal development work that I had done up until that point in time. We're talking about 10 years of very consistent self-development work. Was I able to really be and sit with the humiliation that I experienced as a result of the abuse? Because my abuse happened in front of other people. It wasn't, done in secret or in silence. And nobody tried to stop it. And so there was this humiliation factor that I had really not connected with until I had a therapist mirror it back to me and suggest, wow, that must have been really humiliating. And it was an emotion that I had yet to connect to the experience, but was very true and alive in my system. But I wasn't ready to connect with that up until that very moment. And that, of course, created a massive breakthrough for me, because I realized that the fear of being embarrassed or being humiliated prevented me from really putting myself out there and going deeper into my own self-expression. So it's so important to understand that, again, if you are committed to continuous elevation in your life, in your business, you have to consistently invest in your personal development. If you don't use it, you lose it. It's just like your physical fitness.
Well, and as we have this conversation, we both identify as marketers, right? We sell products and services and coaching and retreats and all of these things. And there is something so unsexy about a marketing message that says your solution is going to take a really long time.
Yeah, right. Well, everybody wants to get to heaven and nobody wants to die, right?
Right. And I vividly remember sitting with, the king of SEO, Damon Burton, and watching him onboard clients into his SEO services.
Sure.
And he set these expectations. Some of these are $10,000 a month clients and some of them are $400,000 a year clients. And right on the front page, it sets the expectation that they will really not see much growth until 12 months into the contract. And
100%.
I remember looking at him and being like, how have you ever sold a single package by saying something's going to take a year? Because that just works against everything that human nature wants. And so I'm so grateful, first off, that you've had such powerful forces to help you uncover your own embarrassment and your own experiences so that you can now face others and help them uncover their own. Step into your marketing idea. Let me start over on that. Let me have you step into your marketing brain for a minute on how have you been able to successfully grow a business whose results aren't particularly measurable, and second, where a time frame is really hard to nail down. You're in the can of worms business, Jake.
Yeah. Great question. Well, from a business perspective, the structure of my business is very different from a typical online service-based business. If you think about a funnel, what's at the top of a funnel? It's lead generation and client attraction, correct? What's at the bottom? It's service delivery. Years ago, I flipped it on its head and I focused on becoming the best at service delivery, at generating breakthrough for my clients. Because in my mind, if I can become incredible at generating breakthrough on the interpersonal for my clients, knowing that our external results are a mirror reflection of our internal results, right? Our external world is merely a reflection of our internal world. Then I'm not going to need to spend a lot of time marketing. So my business is predicated on three things: client retention. Clients stay with me for years because my focus is on mastering my craft and continuing to get better and better over time at what I do. So as a result, I'm able to continue to serve my clients at a high level consistently over time because my focus is on better equipping myself and adding more tools to the toolbox. Number two is client ascension. Clients invest in coaching with me and then they sign up for one of my retreats, or they come to one of my networking events, or they buy one of my courses. So they purchase other things, right? Or they do a VIP in-person intensive.
Awesome. And
then number three is client referrals. They refer me constantly to their friends because the typical result, and I'm not bragging when I say this, but I have a 90% success rate.
Oh, you and Ashley Latimer, you guys got to chat. I love it.
I have a 90% success rate when it comes to my clients. And for the people who don't get the results that they set out to over the past decade, which has been very few, it's come down to two reasons. One, they just simply weren't willing to do the work, right? They came in with the best of intentions, but then when it came time for them to do what, in my opinion, is really required in order for someone to achieve sustainable success and growth, they ran away from it. And there's no judgment whatsoever from me in saying that, because I was a person that knew what my problems were and ran from them for years. The other thing is that I took on a client that I knew I couldn't help. And I'm a big enough person to admit that.
I've done that.
And I'm a big enough person to admit that years ago, I did that. I was new to business. I was fearful of, making enough money to support myself. And I took on a client that like my gut was like, I don't think this is the best fit, or, you can really help this person. I think they need a different type of support, whether it be working with a clinician or, a professional. And I took that person on and they, unsurprisingly didn't get results. But 90% of my clients, because we are so good at communicating proper expectations and setting context, they get results. Because right from the get-go, we're very clear that you need to be consistent, you need to be committed, you need to be coachable, right? If this is going to work, if this is going to produce the results that you say you want. Going back to my client whom we talked about earlier, who had this internal fear around being betrayed. And because of that, right, she kept hiring people who weren't a fit for the role that she was seeking, because when it didn't work out, she got to be right about that. Once we broke through that internal belief and she hired the right person for the role, and she got rid of the contractor that wasn't a fit to take her where she wanted to go, she went from making consistent $50,000 to $60,000 months to, I'm not making this up, $1.1 to $1.3 million a month.
Oh, wow.
In 90 days. 90 days.
100x testimonial right there. Love it.
And a big part of the reason for that was because she had hired an ad agency that was not equipped to serve an enterprise size client. But her doing that, once again, served as confirmation bias to this belief. And so once she became aware of the belief, right? Because now we can do something about it. Now we can work through and overcome it. Whereas before, the belief was in control of her behavior. Now she's aware of it. She's in control of it. We let go of that ad agency and we hired an enterprise size ad agency that had a proven track record of success in serving multiple 7 and 8 figure businesses, onboarded them. And within 2 months, her business exploded.
Incredible.
Unsurprisingly.
And I do love that perspective, because when you believe in the work that you do and you know that by solving the core issue, it ripples into everything else, right?
Yes.
You can say, I was not surprised. I'm super proud of it. I love to share the story, but I wasn't surprised at it. And the part that makes my heart just soar for her is, I witnessed a woman there that you were talking about that just didn't trust herself, right? She didn't trust herself to make a decision. She just wanted to kind of hand everything off. And I'm like, how incredible. This $1 million+ a month business, she can now say, I can better trust myself and my gut to make these decisions, and how that will ripple into so many aspects of her life. I'm fascinated with your ability to flip the script on how a business should be built, right? Because isn't the business we're all supposed to be in is the lead business? That's the rumor, right? That's the cool thing.
Well, that's what they tell you, right?
That's what they tell you, right?
Yeah.
And so what I am imagining, I'm digging here a little bit, that you had some sort of an experience that told you to go the other direction, to flip it. So what was your world like then that made you decide to do the opposite? Are you just a rebel by nature?
Like, yes and no. I always grew up questioning. I grew up in a very conservative, religious Christian environment. And I don't know what it was about me, but I always questioned things. I wouldn't say doubted. It's just that I was innately curious and I wanted to, test and prove, right? But, as far as like the online world is concerned, I'm 40 years old. And so I imagine you can, relate to this insofar that like we were raised very, very differently. We didn't have social media. Millennials are this very unique generation insofar that we didn't grow up with social media, but we use it every single day. So because of that, we are much more patient when it comes to results, when it comes to creating anything of substance. So for me, I've always been a quality over quantity person. Much of that comes with the fact that we, as millennials, we had more self-play growing up because we didn't have all these screens. Like I didn't have cable TV till I was like 16. It was like just nothing but local channels. So the majority of my playtime was void of screens, TV, video games. There's no such thing as iPhones or iPads back then, or just like any subscription service where you can watch anything under the sun. So the majority of my self-play happened outside in nature. Nature goes slow. So I've always been a quality over quantity person. And when I was in the healthcare industry, I realized very quickly that the right strategic customers and relationships can completely change the trajectory of your business.
Amen.
We got one customer and it almost instantly put us on the path to seven figures.
One customer.
Yep. Our second client was Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, which if you're familiar or unfamiliar, is the largest hospital system in LA County. Incredible. So that was our second ever client. And it put us on the fast track towards seven figures. And we went from virtually nothing to over $4 million a year in business in 18 months. And so you mix that with the fact that I've just always been a quality over quantity person. And I was like, I don't need hundreds of clients. And also the juice for me isn't in making money. So many marketers are focused on making money as opposed to creating results for people. If you focus on creating results for people, money's never going to be an issue. It will never be an issue.
Amen.
And so I kind of came into the online coaching space, as a very seasoned entrepreneur. I wasn't like in my, 20s, just rose-colored glasses with very little experience coming into an industry that was very much the Wild West and on some level kind of still is. I came into this industry in my early 30s with, 5, 6, 7 years of, corporate executive level and entrepreneurial experience. And I'm like, this is easy. Just serve people at a really, really high level, make yourself irreplaceable. And I did.
Where have we gone wrong?
My retention rate, like I mentioned, client retention, client ascension, my retention rate with clients was so high that I was like, why am I spending time trying to find more new clients? Because my current existing clients are providing so much stability for my business and consistency for my business that if I just focus on becoming a better and better coach over time, they're going to continue to renew with me because my ability to serve them over time continues to improve. And so I just continue to invest in that, invest in my own mentorship, invest in my own personal development, invest in my own skill set. And unsurprisingly, the life cycle of my average client is around 18 months. That's an incredible amount of consistency and is worth in the neighborhood of $50,000. So I don't need dozens and dozens of clients every year in order to have a successful business. I need to have a few clients that I serve on a very deep level who get great results, who renew with me, who invest in other services of mine, and then who tell a few people.
And you may think I've pulled out the most random part of this whole conversation. Something that just stands out to me in such a, I can't think of a better word, other than peaceful, is I imagine two different Jakes that could wake up one morning.
Yeah.
And one is the typical internet marketer, Jake, that could wake up Zippy and say,
Sure.
how am I going to make a couple $1,000 today? Or how am I going to make money today?
Yep.
Or I compare the Jake that's in front of me that wakes up and says, how am I going to be better at my craft today? Right. Sure. And there's just two very, very different personas there of those two Jakes that pop out of bed in the morning. And the one that I would want to work with, or the one that, I feel here today in this conversation, is the one that wakes up and says, I'm going to master my craft because I know everything else that I want will come out of that. And that to me is impressive and also very unreasonable.
Thank you. It's very indicative or reflective, I should say, of the first half of life versus the second half of life. First half of life is all about self-actualization and individuation, making something of myself, where the focus is primarily on accomplishment, achievement, and success. The second half of life is very different. It's about transformation and transcendence.
Yeah.
Where the focus is on being in relationship with a higher power and being put on the path to a higher purpose. I see the work that I do as a calling and as sacred, and I treat it as such. So that by and large directs my efforts and my focus, because my focus is on achieving the highest degree of deep impact in my clients. Full stop.
Full stop. I have two more questions for you as part of this conversation. And one of them is, you had mentioned you grew up in a very conservative religious home.
Yep.
And you just referenced, I feel that my work is a calling and that it's sacred and that there's a higher power. What is your stance with spirituality now that you've come to this sort of second part of your life?
Well, spirituality gives us a higher force for living. As long as the focus of your life, of your work, is on you and making money and establishing yourself, it's going to prove to be incomplete and insufficient when it comes to matters of the soul. It can't withstand suffering, is the way that I like to put it. So we need something of greater substance. When we're young, we don't really have language for this because most people haven't experienced significant loss. So for men, but we kind of all have to go through an experience where this becomes true for us. For women, it most commonly happens when they become a mother.
Amen.
They intimately know that life is not about me, right? Men need to have a different experience of this. They need to have another man support them in their initiation, where they are initiated into certain promises, we'll say, right? Life is hard, right? The paradox being that the moment I accept that life is hard, life becomes easier. You are not that important, right? Your life is not about you. You are not in control and you are going to die. When a man is initiated into those promises, right? That's when I would suggest that they really become a man.
Amen.
Where they understand that life is not about me. It's about being in service to others. It's about humanity. It's about, living into and answering the question, what was I born to do? Not what can I do to make the most amount of money? I could make a lot more money if I went and did medical sales, which I used to do, medical software sales. I am wholly content making significantly less money than I could otherwise be making, because the satisfaction for me is in seeing someone's life completely transform and change, and seeing them, and granted, the credit is all theirs, right? They're the ones that are actually showing up and doing the work. I'm just a conduit for it. But seeing the entire trajectory of their life change for the better. I've had men who could not have children because they were holding on to so much tension and repressed emotion that they could not get pregnant. And I can't say that this was the only thing, but I've had many men, not just a couple, attribute their ability to conceive to a lot of the interpersonal work that they've done with me, because it has allowed them to release and let go of the tension and these suppressed emotions that are blocking them.
Why would it not be connected? Why would it not be connected? I mean, I even think I'm interjecting my own, this interview is about you. I'm going to interject my own feelings about when you witness nature and wildlife in times of fire and famine and stress, they cannot reproduce, right? And I'm like, why do we think that we are any different? And so I love your approach there of, there's a spirituality, you get to be a conduit to that, of just, there is something higher there that we are living for. And so why would it not be connected, right? Why would it not?
Yeah. Well, and the endeavors of the first half of life ultimately need to prove incomplete and insufficient. It is actually part of, it's important for men's psychological development for them to go through that phase or that stage.
Beautiful.
Where it's all about me and it's all about proving, posturing, and performing. They need to go through that phase or that stage, but they were never meant to stay there. And the unfortunate reality is that we have a lot of 15-year-old men in 40-year-old man's bodies because we don't have enough mentors in our society. We don't, right? And we aren't initiated into paradox. And so there's just a lot of dualistic thinking. Democrat, Republican, good, bad, right, wrong. It serves us well as adolescents, but we ultimately have to let go of it if we're going to love anything or anyone correctly.
And aren't we seeing that just play out in the world we live in, right? That I'm a believer in women and in women doing really great things. And it cannot come at the expense of diminishing men. It can't.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's no surprise though. If you want to control a society, then you need first to attack men and what goes into making them men, which is their innate masculinity. I'm not saying that there are not toxic expressions of masculinity. Like if you just take a minute to look around, it's fairly rampant, but masculinity is not inherently toxic. And so how do we cultivate that? How do we encourage that of what it looks like to be a man of service and a man who provides and protects? That's what we're biologically wired to do. But if you make men wrong for that, well, then they're going to become passive and they're going to become overly feminine. And then through feminism, if you pair that into the equation, well, then you're going to have a lot of women who naturally step into a more masculine role and become the breadwinner. And we wonder why a lot of women can't get pregnant these days, because they're holding on to so much tension. Because they're playing a role that biologically, this has nothing to do with my political beliefs or anything like that, that biologically they are just not meant for.
It is such a deep question of how we got so off track, and I'm a believer in the adversary, right? That there are dark forces at play in the world that we live in. And the only solution that I can find is there's got to be a way for both to rise in the ways that we are meant to rise. And I have obviously looked into the world of being a female and in many, many different elements. And I also have been so blessed to be married to a man who is the picture of masculinity. And when you started reading down those phrases of initiation or brotherhood or whatever you call those questions, I was like, yes, that's him. Yes, that's masculinity. Yes, that's blessed my life. And as I raise two boys, I've got 2 boys and 2 girls, I look at the forces at play that are trying to steal all of those elements from them, and freaks me out, if I'm honest, right? It freaks me out. But I'm so grateful that they have a mentor in place, their dad, right? Who I adore, that can give them those examples as they enter those second phases of their lives.
That's awesome.
Wow. This has been a conversation. This has been a conversation. Maybe we have to have a part 2 in store as we dive deeper into this.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, let's do it. I have a second final question for you, and then a couple of rapid fire questions as we finish up our interview. I am thinking so deeply about the younger you, about the experiences that you've had, that young Jake, and the life that you lead now of purpose and fulfillment and legacy and perspective and all of those things that really define masculinity. What would you tell that young Jake?
It's a good question. I would need to sit with that for a minute, but for the sake of this conversation, it would probably be that you have nothing to prove, you have nothing to protect, you're good enough as you are, and that's enough.
He's got a really cool life coming, doesn't he?
Well, and everything that you want is on the other side of the things that you're avoiding.
Man, that's probably a message for young Jake and every single listener here. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
We have been so blessed to sit with you today. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your value, we just covered the whole gamut today. And I'm so grateful for what you've brought to the table. In typical unreasonable autonomy fashion, I just have 2 fast questions that you can probably answer really quick, that we can wrap up this interview with. So the first one is one I ask every single guest, and it is, what is one book that every single entrepreneur must read?
I would probably have to say The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
Okay. All right. I always add it to my Amazon list. So, okay, The Untethered Soul. And we will put it down in the comments as well. The second and final question is, what is something, Mr. Adventure, is on your bucket list that you have not yet accomplished?
Something that's on my bucket. You're asking an Enneagram 7 this question, which, if you're familiar, is the enthusiast. So everything, but my best friend is also a 7, and he, has a phrase. It's like, I want everything all the time, all at once. But actually, this is perfect. When I was in college, quick story, I graduated in 2008, right when the housing market crashed. And my marketing professor, his name was Tom Johnson. I don't even know if he's still alive, but they were kind of explaining to us the impact of what was going on, and the significance of the housing market crash. Because prior to 2008, you could graduate college and it was basically, you were a shoo-in to get a good job.
Yeah.
Market crashes. And he was my senior seminar professor, and he was explaining to our class that it was likely going to take years for the economy to recover, and that it would really impact our ability to find employment. And I'll never forget, one of the students asked him, if you were knowing this, if you were me, what would you do? And he said, I would go home for the summer. He's like, I would go back to my summer job. He goes, I would make as much money as possible. He goes, and then I would then I would go to Europe, and I wouldn't come home until I either finished War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy or I ran out of money. And I promised myself a long time ago that eventually one day I would do that.
That's iconic.
Yep.
It's
and
not
this is, I'm 40 now, so this is almost 20 years ago, right? And so I told myself that someday I am going to do that. You could ask me, what was the most significant thing that I took away from college? And honestly, that would probably be it. Nothing that I learned in the classroom.
That conversation. Sadly, many of us feel the same way. So incredible. Well, I expect a personal note when you do it. I'm going to hold you to it. Incredible.
Will do.
Well, thank you to the amazing Jake Kauffman. For those of you who he is new in your world, lucky you. You can look below in all of the show notes to find his book. You can find the books he thinks you should read. You can find ways to connect with him. You can find absolutely every way to make sure that he is part of your everyday entrepreneurship experience. Thank you again, Jake, for being here, for delivering such high value, and just for being a good human that we've been able to talk to today. Thank you again so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Unreasonable Autonomy podcast. If you loved this episode, my guests and I would love to hear about it. Go to the show notes to reach out and let me know what resonated with you or what topics or guests you want to hear in the future. I am here to create for you. Look, I deeply admire your commitment to pushing boundaries and going after an unreasonable life. Keep dreaming big, taking bold steps, and expecting the unreasonable. For more, go to the show notes to dive deeper into the conversations that will keep you going. Thanks for being here.